Greetings and salutations. I hope this video finds you doing well. Today I want to talk about an experience I had last week that really brought it home to me just how good Linux has become. For those of you who have found this video who are not familiar with me or my channel, way back in 2014 I started posting videos about Linux, which led to a project called Easy Linux, where I was trying to install Linux on everybody's computer in the world, and I would do it for you if you asked me. And it became a community outreach sort of thing, and it kind of came and went. But there's a lot of content on this channel that has to do with Linux, and while some of it is sort of outdated at this point, a lot of it is still useful, so you could go check it out if you wanted to. For those of you who have been around for a while, thank you for sticking around. I don't post very often these days. I just post every now and again, and of course I also post on this channel videos about audio-related things, turntables, CD players, speakers, amplifiers, all that kind of stuff. And I've been doing that since the channel started way back in 2008, so the two subjects kind of switch back and forth. Today we're going to talk about Linux. And today it is a screencast from my Linux Mint Debian Edition 6 desktop. And I will be showing you a few illustrations throughout the video, but mostly it's just me rambling. So let's begin. About a year ago now, I bought my son a computer from eBay. And it was very similar to the one you see right here. Now, I'm not recommending this particular seller or anything, but you could check it out if you wanted to. And I bought him one of these computers very similar to this. It even looks just like it, so I'm thinking this is probably the same seller. I didn't go back and look at the orders and confirm and research that and all that stuff. Sorry. The point I'm trying to make here with this is that on eBay, if you go and you type in gaming PC, you're going to see that you can get one of these refurb Dells or HPs, and they have put some blinking lights on it, and they sell them with keyboards that light up and stuff like that. They're really just basic computers. And I paid completely for the whole thing, probably about $600. I don't remember what it was, because I bought the computer, and of course with the computer they send you a monitor, and they send you a mouse, and they send you... This one came with even a Wi-Fi dongle. It was pretty much everything, and then I bought some speakers to put along with it. The idea here was to get a good basic computer already put together, ready to go out the door, and he wanted Windows. Now, in my house, we stopped using Windows back in 2014, and he was about 8 years old when I stopped using Windows. And he has played Steam games through the years. But on the hardware that we had and that I was able to give him, there was always an issue trying to get Proton to work, the Windows compatibility layer in Steam, because it was under development and all this other stuff. So when it came time for him to get a new computer, he said, "Dad, I want Windows 10. That'll make it easy." I said, "Okay, that's fine. I'll give you Windows 10. So I bought him this system and set him up. And yes, I installed Windows and set that up on the system. I got it all ready for him. I said, "Here you go." And to be honest and fair, Windows has done pretty good. It didn't really give us any major issues. I went in there and, of course, trimmed all the crap that it tries to start up and turned off as much crap in there as I possibly could. But I do not consider myself these days a Windows expert anymore, because I have been using Linux except for my work computer, which I don't do anything to, because guess what? It's my work computer, and if it breaks, they can fix it. And I have been focusing on Linux for so long that my Windows is a little rusty. But we were able to get it up and running, get it running smoothly. He was able to play Steam games. He was able to use Discord to talk to his friends. Get online, he could play music, he could do all the stuff he wanted to do with a computer. My son is pretty hip about how computers work, and he has wangled it that all of his pictures and even documents and whatever is all up in the cloud somewhere. He uses Google Docs and Instagram and Facebook and all of the different services to store whatever he can. Google Photos, it's all off the hard drive. So for him, a computer is really just an internet appliance. It's just a way for him to get online and he can play games, and that's all he cares about. So this was the lone personal Windows machine on the network, and therefore it was kind of isolated because every other machine in this house, and I have 4 Linux computers, if you count the file server, that are all on the network. And of course I can use SSH and I can sync files back and forth. It's all kinds of groovy stuff that I can do. The Windows machine, no. I had no access to. It was firewalled. Totally his responsibility. You install the updates. You deal with it. And I told him when I bought the machine, I said, I might not be able to support this, mainly because the machine that I bought wouldn't run Windows 11 at that time. So we couldn't upgrade, so we're stuck with 10. We knew that. And it was just a temporary solution anyway, because if that machine should become obsolete or EOL'd, I don't want to use the word obsolete, because obsolete is different from end of life by Microsoft. If they say it won't run on it, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the hardware. It just means that they're trying to push you to buy new hardware. I would buy him another computer. I'd buy him another box if I had to, or upgrade that one or whatever at that point in time. So this is how it's been rolling, and everything's been doing fine. And then last week, I was sitting here and I was actually trying to come up with a Linux project that I could make a video about, because I hadn't posted anything in so long. I was thinking maybe I could do something cool with virtual machines. I've been playing around with Ubuntu 24.04, which is the latest long-term support release. And there's a lot of things. Some things I like about it, some things I don't. There's bugs in it. That's a future video. We'll talk about it when we get a little bit closer to it. Because right now, with Ubuntu 24.04, you can't do an in-place upgrade. When we get to that point, I'm going to do a video where I'll do an in-place upgrade on my file server, and then we'll talk all about it. And so I'm playing with it in the background in virtual machines and all that stuff. So I was trying to come up with something to post, and he walks in the room, and literally I'm downloading stuff, ISO images of Linux distributions to look at, and maybe I'll do a video about one. He comes in and says, Dad, I think I broke my computer. I said, what is it? And he said, well, I can't get it to boot up. He said, there's a problem. And I'm kind of giggling, thinking, it's something simple. We'll fix this real quick. Because it's a relatively new machine, or a refurbished machine, and it's very simple. There's not much in it. This machine has 32 gigabytes of RAM. It has a 1 terabyte M2 SSD, and it's a i9 processor, Intel i9. So it's relatively new, stable hardware in here. So I go in and look at the computer, and I'm getting he said that he had gotten a blue screen of death. He said what happened, he was sitting there and he was just chatting with his friend on Discord, and they were getting ready to go play a game or something like that, because he does the multiplayer games all the time. But he hadn't actually started that yet. And the machine just stopped. Everything stopped responding, and then he got a blue screen of death, and he tried to restart the machine, and when he did, he got a black screen of death, which had an error message that said Windows could not access a device, and that he would need to run the Windows 10 repair utility. You'd have to boot it up off of a startup disk. So I got in there and started poking around, and the only information that I could get out of the machine was it couldn't read some device. I didn't know what that was, but I had a hunch it was the M2 drive. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the M2 drive has fried itself and it's just dead. and I'll have to get another one of those. And, you're thinking about all this stuff that you're going to have to do. So meanwhile, I went and made myself a Windows boot USB stick and put it in there and tried to get the machine to boot off of Windows. Well, I couldn't even get it to let me get to a boot menu to choose what to boot off of. So I kept having to poke at it. I finally got into the BIOS. I finally turned off the fast boot, and I was able to get to a boot menu, and I tried to boot the machine off of Windows, no dice. It would just skip right past it like it wasn't bootable. So I thought, well, maybe I did something wrong when I created the boot media. I came in, plugged it in my computer, the one that I'm recording this video on. Guess what? It booted. I had no problem getting into it. And I thought, well, what's going on with this? So I said, let me go boot this machine off of Linux. If I can do that, I can at least find out if there's any dead hardware, because I can look at the diagnostic tools in Linux and look at the hard drive and see if I could get to it and all that stuff. So what I ended up doing was booting it off of Linux Mint. And I just happened to have a Linux Mint USB laying around. And so I was able to get it to boot. I'm like, okay, the computer's alive. Now let's see if the hard drive is okay. So I looked at it, and I used Gparted. Switch desktops, I have it open. This is my very favorite graphic tool for dealing with storage media in Linux. And if you're not familiar with it, go off and learn how to use it. It's very powerful. And I have my system set up in a very strange way. And let me just take a moment to explain this, because people are going to be looking at this and going, what has he got going on, man? So there's a bunch of SSDs in this machine, the one that I'm recording on. The main one is an M2. It is a terabyte. It's a Samsung 970. And it's a terabyte M2 SSD, and I'm only using 250 gigabytes of it, and I use it as a boot drive. If you take a drive like this and only use 250 gigabytes and then just put Linux on it, it's basically going to last forever, because you're putting so little stress on the SSD. And then I also have here, this is, let's see, make sure I tell you the right thing here. This is my home partition right here, and it's on a Evo 960, which is a SATA SSD, which I had before I bought the machine. And then there's another drive in here, and what this drive is for is simply virtual machines, and it is formatted with XFS, and the other two partitions you see have ext4 on them. And the idea here is to be able to spread the load of all the work the machine does across a bunch of SSDs, so I'm not wearing out one and using all my write cycles in one place. If you do this sort of strategy and you have SSDs that have a lot of free space, they'll last a long time. Probably much longer than the computer that you're using will be useful. We're talking many, many years. So anyhow, that's why this is set up that way. Anyway, so I was able to get Gparted up and running on Linux Mint on his computer. And yes, I could see the drive, and I could see the partitions on the drive that Windows had created. Pretty standard setup. And there was a recovery partition. Everything that you would think that you needed. But Linux could not get into these partitions. I couldn't see them. Now, I don't know whether there was some sort of security going on that I didn't know about, like the partitions were encrypted, because when I set up the system, the Windows was already installed as an OEM install, and then all I did was create the user account, see? So it was already there. I have no idea how it was set up when it was installed at the factory, when they refurbed the machine. But it could not be read by Linux at all. I just have no idea what was going on there. So I turned around and I said, there's really only one way for me to figure out whether the actual hard drive is dead or not, and that would be to use Gparted to try and write a new partition table. So if you go to Gparted and you go to Device, right, and you go to Create Partition Table, and you choose to do this, of course it's telling me I can't do this because it's on the machine that's running. The machine is running on this right now, and it's telling me it can't do it. But if this was booted up from a USB stick and I could see the hard drive in the machine, then I would be able to choose to create a new partition table, and that would basically just blow everything out and you just start from scratch, because if you rewrite the partition table, you're going to lose all of the information about all of the file systems that were on that drive. So I told him, I said, I told him, I might have to install Linux to get this thing up and running for a while until I can figure out how to install Windows on it. So sure enough, I was able to put a new partition table on that drive, which eliminated all of the Windows partitions, and now we're starting from scratch. And I said, okay, so now I had to think, what Linux distribution do I give this kid? Because I kind of was thinking that I was going to put Linux Mint on it because I'm really liking Mint these days. But then I went, no, he's mainly here for Steam games, and he's going to be learning how to use this. If he ends up using this for any period of time, I want him to learn how to use it. So I'm going to create for him an administrative account. He's going to have root privileges. He can manage the machine, and he can learn more about managing Linux. When he was younger, all of my kids that had access to a computer, they had a basic user account and didn't have admin privileges. And for obvious reasons, security, they couldn't download things or try and install things and mess up the system. But he's old enough to learn how to do this, and it's his own machine. So that was my plan. So I decided to just go ahead and put Ubuntu 22.04 on there. And I figured that would be the quickest way for him to get back into Linux, and also that he would be able to find documentation about especially Steam-related problems, because let's face it, guys, the best documentation in the Linux community about Linux is Ubuntu. And there's more guides and how-tos that talk about how to do things on Ubuntu than any other. And Ubuntu, when you first install it, is lean and mean and doesn't have a lot of extra things installed. So it's perfect for his use case, which is basically internet appliance. So I went ahead and installed Ubuntu 22.04 on the machine, and it went very well. The only problem that I had was that I had bought for him one of those 5G Wi-Fi USB adapters to get him on a 5G network. And although there were a couple of workarounds that I found for this thing, and I tried to install drivers and it wouldn't work, so we gave up on that. So he is on a 2G little TP-Link dongle, which works with the kernel with no drivers installed. So far, that has not been a major issue, because it turns out that Ubuntu, for what he wants to do, is working better than Windows. And that's the upshot of this entire story. I was able to install Ubuntu, get it up and running on the machine. Of course, I'm checking the health of the drive the whole time, and there's no problems. So my conclusion is Windows basically borked itself. It just destroyed itself. Why? I don't know. I have no way of knowing what was going on, because all trace of that installation is gone. When I was installing Ubuntu, I was able to get into the BIOS. I relaxed some of the security features a little bit, made it a little easier to access the boot menu on that machine, kind of smoothed things out a little bit, which is nice. So I got that done. I got Linux installed. Ubuntu was up and running. I made one mistake, and I have said this in many, many videos in the past, and I broke my own rule, and it screwed me up in the end. So let me tell you again. When you install Linux, do not do anything to the machine until you run the updates, because this can lead to trouble later. Because if you install drivers, for instance, on that machine, you might be installing an old driver. Now, if you're in a situation where you have to install a driver because you want to get it on Wi-Fi or something like that, there might be an exception to that rule. But still, man, if you can do it, make sure that you can run all the updates and then go install your drivers. The NVIDIA card, which was in the machine, originally I had installed NVIDIA 470 for the drivers, and that was what it offered. So I installed that, rebooted it. It appeared to be working. I had accelerated graphics. Ubuntu had switched itself over to x.org and not Wayland because we were using NVIDIA. It figured that out. Great. Everything's going along just fine. And then I installed Steam, and we started to download the games that my son likes to play. Well, the first couple of games that we installed were Linux native, TF2 and Hoi 4. And so therefore we just installed the Linux versions and they ran just fine. But then I tried to get Proton up and running so he could run his Windows games, and I ran into an issue where Proton was just simply not seeing the accelerated video card that NVIDIA's was even there. And so what I did, I downloaded the Mesa Utils package, which is a great little package if you're trying to figure out what's going on with your video card, because it will actually run a test where it'll send insane frame rates to the video card, and it creates these little gears on the screen. You may have seen that, and it gives you output in a terminal, and it tells you exactly what's going on. Well, Mesa Utils said it was working, but then Proton couldn't see it. So I'm going off, doing research, learning about Proton. I'm like, wow, they're saying this should just work. I don't understand. So then it hits me, a little light goes off, and by now, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I've been poking at this machine all night long. I said, let me go double check the drivers. Maybe I installed the wrong NVIDIA drivers. Well, I went back and looked, and turns out that his particular card really needs NVIDIA 535. And that's the set of drivers that his card uses. And I said, okay. So I reinstalled the drivers, rebooted the machine, went to Steam, everything worked. Now what's really cool about that is the fact that we were playing some Windows games that he had already been playing on Windows now. We just re-downloaded them to Steam because Steam keeps track of all the games that you have, and it goes, oh, you have a new computer? Well, here, let me just update myself. We'll go get all the information, and it's great. Steam is a wonderful platform for gaming, no matter what kind of computer you have. When we got the Windows stuff installed and up and running, all of it ran better than it did when it was running on Windows natively, with the proper NVIDIA drivers. I mean, not just a little bit better, I mean a lot better. Because I remember when he was running Windows that I would go into his room sometimes and he would be playing a game, and the fans in that machine would really be running. They would be, you could tell it was working pretty hard and he was trying to do something with it. Not where it's like screaming like, oh my God, the machine's going to explode and it's going to catch on fire or something like that, but you could tell the machine was working. Now that machine is back onto Linux, I created an account for myself. I have SSH access. All of my network sync stuff is working. I'm doing all that stuff with it. So while he's playing these games that originally were a challenge for Windows, I can log into the machine and see how hard it's working and just use HTOP, which is a super tool. If you're not familiar with HTOP, let me show it to you. It's really great. See, this is HTOP, and it gives you a real quick view on how hard that machine is working. So I was able to use this tool. I'm logged in to his machine, looking at this in the terminal. It's loafing. It's hardly working at all playing this game. That machine runs 10 times better now, rendering game video and the stuff that he does with it than it did before running on Windows. And so when I got all of that set up, he turned around to me. He said, Dad, I don't think I need to install Windows on this machine. He said, I just play Steam games. He said, And if the Windows versions of the Steam games run in Steam with Proton, I don't care. And that was the end of the discussion. And by the time we went to bed, which was about 2 in the morning, I went in there and looked before I laid down. He'd already customized the screen and set the theme the way he wanted it to. I downloaded GNOME Tweak for him and kind of explained that to him. He's not ever really used the GNOME desktop before. Or if he has, it's been a long, long time ago. And so he took to it like a fish to water. It was just, yeah, okay, I'm good. And now he's like coming in here and saying, I don't need Windows. Gee, we should have done that a long time ago, Dad. Craziness, right? Absolute craziness. So that is why this video is titled, We've Come a Long Way. It is unbelievable how far we've come, because when I first started seriously playing with Linux, which was in the late aughts, there were so many issues and so many problems. And back in those days, you couldn't, it was difficult to get YouTube video to play. Back in those days, YouTube was using Flash video, and Flash was proprietary, and so you had to figure out how to install it to make it work. And if you wanted to play an MP3 file, you had to go get those codecs and all that. It was a big pain in the ass, and even once you did get them all installed, it wouldn't work. And nowadays, it pretty much all works right out of the box. You don't have to mess with any of that stuff. Just download the software that you need and get to work. So, now, a couple things I wanted to point out here. This is my machine that I'm recording this on, and the processor activity that you see is me capturing high-def video, which you're watching. This is this particular machine has a Ryzen chip in it, 3400, I believe. And I use the internal GPU, and it does everything I need. I'm not playing games. But I just wanted to point that out in case anybody was looking at that going, wow, why is that, what are we looking at there? That's this machine capturing video. This is how hard it works. So just wanted to put that out there. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Ubuntu before I wrap this video up. And if you've hung around this long, thank you very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate it, because you may be saying, why did you put him on Ubuntu? It might not be your favorite distribution of Linux. You might not like snaps or whatever. And I have misgivings about Ubuntu as well these days, ups and downs. But I decided to do that simply because Ubuntu is home to me, and it's very easy for me to work with, and I don't have to think twice about working on Ubuntu or giving out advice about it. It's just, that's where I have spent most of my time in Linux, is Ubuntu. And as I had stated earlier, documentation and help along the way, should he run into a problem and Dad's not around to jump in and fix it for him, he can find the answer on Ubuntu easier than any other distribution of Linux. Linux Mint is probably second for that, because they have such wonderful forums and things to get things running. But a lot of the times with Linux Mint, you can go to an Ubuntu forum and find the answer to your problem if you're using Linux Mint that's based on Ubuntu. If you're using Debian Edition, where you're kind of on your own, you can go look at Debian, or you can go look at Linux Mint and see if you can figure it out. But anyway, for somebody who is getting started in Linux, especially somebody who really just wants to use the computer to do certain tasks, and that's the situation we're in here. We need to run Steam. We need to run Google Chrome. These are the two most important applications for my son. And then maybe he'll use LibreOffice. Maybe. He may end up doing some graphic stuff at some point, so he might want to do something like that. I don't know. We'll see. He is going to school to become a welder. I don't know what computer applications go along with that, but it might be something that he needs down the road. I think Ubuntu would give him the ability to do that. And, you know, with the Windows 11 thing going on right now, and Microsoft sending down to every Windows 10 computer, hey, you're going to have to switch over, or you're going to have to pay us money for support. Explaining computers here on YouTube. Just did a video about that and talked about getting your machine to run on Windows 11 and all that stuff and how much that would cost. And very good video. You need to go check that out. If you could, I would provide a link, except well, maybe I could do that. I'll put a link to that down in the description. Hopefully I can find it, the video. If I can find it, I'll put a link. If not, there ain't no link. Sorry. How's that? So I'm pretty sure it's still up, but it's a very interesting video I watched not too long ago. And he was talking about when Windows 10 becomes end of life, you're either going to have to buy a new Windows computer if your current one doesn't run Windows 11 or won't, or you can get a long-term support contract with them where you have to pay them for updates, and apparently they're going to really rate businesses. It's like $61 per machine the first year, and then it goes way up. And I mean, like the radio station where I work, we probably have 15 computers that run Windows 10. So start adding all that up. That gets expensive after a while. Of course, it's less expensive than buying brand new hardware just to satisfy the requirements of Windows 11, but I think that the Microsoft's going back on what they said earlier. They had said with Windows 10 that they weren't going to do this, that it was going to be a continuously rolling release, and it would continue to work pretty much forever, or at least there'd be some sort of alternative to let it work. They've decided they're going to do a hard release, and it's artificially end of life for a lot of hardware that's working perfectly and doing what it needs to do for people, and it just adds piles of junk that we have to figure out what to do with now. E-waste. Perfectly good machines that are being shut down because Windows doesn't want to support them anymore. That bothers me a great deal. However, most of those machines will run happily on a Linux distribution, depending on drivers, of course. But the only bad thing that you would deal with if you had a particularly old NVIDIA card, NVIDIA stopped supporting their older cards, and there's a hard cutoff now for that. And that kind of bit me because I had to buy another machine because it had an old NVIDIA card in it. But that machine was really on its last legs. I mean, it was ready to go. It was ready for the recycle bin. It was all right. It's no big deal. Just get rid of it, you know. Anyway, I'm rambling now. Rolling on and on. But I think maybe you're probably going to see a lot more people coming to Linux, and a lot more people can come to Linux these days and do everything they need to do with their computer and leave Windows behind, because Linux has gotten so good. And that's the point of this video. So this is a good place to stop. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I certainly do appreciate it. I don't know what the next video is going to be on this channel. I am going to most likely do a video, as I mentioned earlier, when I upgrade my file server. That's become sort of a tradition on the channel, and we'll talk about Ubuntu 24.04 at that time. I'll upgrade the file server live, and you guys can watch that happen. And of course, we'll probably have some more audio related stuff come along as well. So yeah, stick around. The content doesn't come as frequently as it had before, but hopefully when it does, it is exciting and makes you crave more, right? Sure. Talk to you guys later.